Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, an inspired conversation space between Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner on the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness.
We keep our conversations honest, our experiences real, and our philosophies exploratory. We believe that in order to raise incredible humans, we first have to raise ourselves. We know that in order to rock the family, you've got to nourish the mother. If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively, head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper. And for all live-streamed pre-release podcasts and all our free content, head over to our free Facebook group, Nourishing the Mother with Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is When Respectfully Parenting Babies Raises Eyebrows. And it comes from a listener's email, which we are enormously grateful for because we actually really love to be able to meet you where you're at and to be able to extend the conversation, to be able to take you into your next growth and next capacity to meet and be with and raise consciousness within yourself and your children. So thank you to that beautiful listener for being brave and bold enough to ask a question. Would you like to read the email, Bridge?
Yeah. This dear listener says, "Hi, Bridget and Julie. Thank you so much for making your incredible podcast. I cannot thank you enough. It has been so very nourishing in my motherhood journey so far. I have been spending a lot of time lately pondering the topic of parenting choices when in the presence of family and friends. I find that when I'm with others, I'm constantly making decisions about whether to speak up or let it slide when it comes to things that they say to my baby. This is leaving me feeling really drained after any socializing. There are some things that are absolutely not okay and that I will speak up about straight away. But there are other things that I'm just not so sure about in terms of whether they actually matter. I don't want other people to feel like everything they say to my daughter is wrong or not to enjoy their time with her because they are critiqued. Do you have any wisdom to share about how you navigated this? Thank you so much. And I'm really sorry if this is something that you have a lot of content on or that I've missed or forgotten. It's actually not something we have a lot of content on, so I really love that we have had this question. So if you have a lingering question for us, any other listener here, please do send it in, because if you're wondering it, I'm sure there's other listeners who want to know this stuff too. So thank you, listener. We're going to dive right in.
Yeah. So when you and I were first going, yep, okay, we want to cover off just a few points here. One of those was that jarring meeting point of different experiences of raising children. Would you like to extend that part of the conversation?
Yeah, and I have so much compassion for this listener, because I can totally see there's been versions of me that have been this, even to the point where I know at one point my own mother said to me, I feel like I don't kind of know where I can stand or what's okay and not okay, right? When our family can witness a level of intensive parenting that we're doing. And so I can totally put myself there. And it's powerful to consider that we are each a product of our time and of our background, and that for many family members, they are relating to babies in very much the way that they would have been related to, and that they've seen it done more broadly in our culture. And very often it's from a place of doing to a baby. It's not really involving the baby as a co-creator of an experience or as a whole person that we want to seek permission from. And so when we parent from that place, it can feel really uncomfortable for those around us to witness, because it can not only bring up for them where they may feel inferior perhaps in how they're relating to the baby, but also it may raise for them a deep unconscious wounding perhaps about their own unheard feelings as a baby. So you've got these two things that can come up for others when they see this kind of deep communication or relationship with a baby that is largely not demonstrated in our culture.
Gosh, I just love everything that you just said then. Like I'm going to press rewind to listen to it again. What I love about it is it offers us a lens with which to bring more connection and compassion rather than focusing on our difference and that they're oppositional.
Yeah, absolutely. Because otherwise, all you're going to end up is, you know, beautiful, connected relationship over here with your child and fractious, painful relationship over here with family and friends. And yeah, is it really something that you want to play a switch game with? I don't think we do if we're valuing relationship. Ultimately, we want to uplevel all of them. And so that means being willing to bring others on a journey and also hold others in great compassion and respect for who they are and where they're at.
Yeah.
And also trusting that your baby is whole and can sense the differentness in communication and different people's values and what they've come from and who they are, because they're going to get it in their parents. And the more one way one parent is, the more the other one's going to be. And if both parents are super duper conscious and connected and respectful, then there'll be the layer outside the baby that will bring a little bit of challenge and that will be bring a little bit of that unconsciousness.
Yeah.
So trying to create a perfect bubble around the baby will likely only bring out more feelings of discontent and discomfort as we realize that it's kind of futile to expect the rest of the world to value that which you deeply value.
Yeah. Amen, podcaster.
Right.
It's so true, because we as listeners and creators of this podcast know inherently that our number one value is family. But it is not for every human, and that doesn't mean their values are less.
Yeah, that's right.
Or less conscious or less of a contribution to humanity.
Or less of a contribution to this child, right? Like every parent or every person in a child's life will love that child through the lens of their own values, right? So like I'm not going to expect my mum to sit there with my children's rage, but I watch her with her dedication and her presence when she's teaching them something or when she's guiding them in a process through her art. And I am like, I could never do that, right? Because I don't know how she does that. And she looks at me and what I hold with my kids and she's like, I don't know how she does that, right? Because we're not supposed to be all things to them. And the more we can allow the other people around them's values and genius and wisdom and love to come through to our children in their unique way, the more our children get to experience the richness of that diversity. So that's not to do away with boundaries around communication or handling of our babies, but it is just to make sure that we're orienting a little wider than only this way is okay to relate to my baby.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. I feel like I had about 10 things to say and then you kept talking and then I was like, oh my God, I'm following along with this sentence and I forgot what my was saying. No. It was like genius, but I was in the conversation rather than
like, yeah.
I became a listener. So let's move on and we'll see if my brain decides to keep.
I'm sure it'll come back.
So one of the points that we thought that we would offer to you as well is getting really clear, having a focus point on what's really important for you to address and bring up or create boundary around in terms of the words that potential other caregivers or significant humans in your child's life are using, and those that you can kind of just mellow out a little bit on now while you build compassion for this human. And I would say to you, the step with that I learned was to stop assuming that my way of loving was the best way of loving. And instead to lean back a little bit, because I have the inclination to lean forwards into change. What happens when I lean back and I observe? What can I notice? No different to watching our children play, right? Do we feel like we need to be in the play because that's the only way that we're showing up for them? Or can we lean back and observe them even as they navigate challenge with siblings or playmates or the environment or the toy that they're with? Do we feel like we need to save them from it? Or can we lean back and just have a little pause where we look at the sacredness or a larger dynamic that might be present? So that for me has been one of the greatest tools, is learning that my bullet a gate kind of energetic drive is good in some places and spaces, but if it's not used wisely, it can be destructive, and that includes in the places and spaces of relationship. So learning how to just soothe my own desire to move into action from a human that was trained, if I was doing, then I was of worth. And if I'm not doing something, then I'm not worthy, right? I mean, it's old wounding. So if I'm not in action, then I'm clearly not doing something. So it was really meeting those wounds in me and leaning back a little bit and asking myself to love wider, particularly for someone who, like me, had a mother wound and learned how to be an island. So I learned how to be self-sufficient and reject people because it was easier to do it on my own than it was to be codependent or enmeshed with people. So I don't know if that's your story, beautiful listener, or not, but I do think it adds an extra layer of being willing to lean into relationship with a lens of love rather than they're supporting me or they're against me. So just taking that sacred pause back a little bit and trusting your child so implicitly that they have everything within them that they need to navigate this environment. And I have watched my children go through, in a moment, go through, that microflinch, I didn't like that. How am I going to handle myself here? How am I going to be in relationship or not with this other human in front of me? And that they work out their own relationship dynamic present in this moment. And I see that as enormously helpful and powerful because they will carry those relational skills, how to hold themselves, when to flow and when to be boundaried. That's all learning that is relatively safe because I know that's a safe human who loves them and is connected to them. And I'm one layer out from that, watching the process. So it's a really safe environment for them to learn how to navigate their own growth and emotional development, which I have then witnessed my children take into play spaces, friends' houses, kindergarten, and primary school. So I always saw these setups as, like you and I have said many times, it's not about sweeping away all of the boundary, all of the, bumps and debris that we perceive our children might slip over, but instead returning to the fact that they are whole and I can trust you to navigate because you can trust me that I won't leave you. And if you need me, I'm right here. But I don't need to insert myself in your experience when it's not mine to insert myself in. I can be invited into it. I can be the gatekeeper or the caretaker of it. But, I guess what I'm saying is just bring a level of pause and just watch your children navigate themselves pristinely well and learn humans in the process, because they will come up against or with that version of human for the rest of their lives. You never can just not have those people around you.
Yeah, and it can be such a great reminder too, like when we're on this, conscious relationship path or this, conscious, desire to self-actualize, it can be a really a temptation to throw away so many structures and just basically create your own idyllic wonderland. But if we do that, we actually can under-resource our children. And when you're saying, you know, to watch your children, listen to your children, I mean, it begins when they're tiny. It begins by noticing your baby's body on your body and how they relax around people or tense up. So it might look like the auntie or the mother-in-law saying, "Oh, come here, sweetheart, come, you know, come to grandma." And the baby clings to you. And in that moment, you get to be boundaried enough to say to your baby, who might only be 4 or 5 months old, 6 months old, "It sounds like grandma wants a cuddle. You can choose to have a cuddle with grandma or stay here with me. What would you like to do?" And your baby's body and energy will tell you and show you. And then you get to go, "No, sorry, not at the moment. She just wants to stay here. When she's ready, I can bring her over." And then it's respecting your baby. It's respecting that family member's desire to connect with your baby, but it's not overruling your child or undermining that loved one's desire to connect.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I mean, sportscasting in general, as you talked about it before we started recording, is just the most glorious way of communicating a message without having to feel like you're having a confronting conversation.
Yeah. I mean, it just basically allows the baby to have choice and the other person to orient into the baby's experience. That the baby now has, you know, its own autonomy and is now considered, the baby's desire is now considered as part of this, not just, "I'll just pass my baby to you because you want her."
Yeah.
Which is beautiful because it then becomes a teaching tool in itself as to how we relate to this person.
Yeah, totally. Totally. We're just interrupting this podcast when respectfully parenting babies raises eyebrows to let you know what we've got going on in the world right now. Bridge, what have you got?
Disrupt, Revealing the Mother Wound is a 5-week immersion with me to unpack so much of what we're talking about here in this podcast around the mother wound within you that you have both internalized from your story and also the broader sociological dynamic of motherhood. So find out about that at bridgetwood.life. And you, Jules?
You can stay tuned at julietenner.love, and Lover School will be released in the next couple of weeks. So I would also refer this beautiful listener to last week's podcast where we talked about having hard conversations and looking at intent and impact as two separate experiences of that human. So their intent might be nothing but pure love. They just want to connect with this child. But the impact of what they're doing or how they're doing it can be really painful, can have an impact on that little human. So separating the person and their intent as a good, kind, loving human from the impact that the way that's been gone about or maneuvered might have on the child. So I think go back to that podcast when it comes to having hard conversations, how you can pull them up and do that with compassion, how you can also bring extra compassion, as you said at the beginning, and look at the systems and the era in which these adults grew up in as babies that conditioned how they are. They don't know another way to be. And how can we be really compassionate with where they are and just gently offer them a way to move forwards and through it. And I would return just again to getting really clear on what you want to focus on. So I don't think it's worth going, I'm going to protect my child from everything. But it might be you're like, you know, this thing, I can't, no, we're not doing that. So for me, it was Suki Lala. So my in-laws would say Suki Lala a lot. Well, I'm thinking for my firstborn, I think it was eliminated by the time we got to my second. But certainly with my firstborn, if he was emotional, I'd be, oh, stop being such a Suki Lala. And that was the thing that I chose to focus on. And so I would do 1, the sportscasting, and 2, say, we don't say Suki Lala because he's having feelings and that's okay. He can tell us how he's feeling. And then I would navigate towards him. And then they'd say again, we don't use the word Suki Lala we meet his feelings. You know, and it probably only needed to be said 3 or 4 times. And I don't know that it really appeared again. So it's amazing how quickly people will orient towards you when you maintain connection, because we are connection seeking beings. And if you can maintain love and connection, people want to love you well. They want to be in relation with you. And your boundaries just tell them how. But if you're like hard and fast and you're like, you're so and you can't and you're damaging, it's just like, oh yeah, okay, this thing just happened. I don't know if you know, like from our podcast last week, but you know, we don't use those words for these reasons. What we do instead is this. And then I would turn to my child and do it. And then I'd be back, you know, how was Sunday? How's the weekend? Like, it's not about that it needs to be in a fractured relationship. It's just a way of guiding into the type of relationship that you want to have, and boundaries that another person learn how to love you well, right? So, but they can be delivered in a really beautiful way at the same time as being compassionate. That I could hear the words, "You're being a suki lala," and initially I was incredibly triggered by them. But that was because I had grown up never having my emotions listened to. So I was like Joan of Arc on listening to feelings. I was like, every feeling must be listened to or you're damaged for life, you know. So them saying that each time was really triggering for my inner child. But as I healed those pathways and as I navigated what it meant to be really conscious, not just listen to every emotional rupture from my children, I could actually soften into that and see and feel into the fact that their intent was they really wanted this child to have a really good time in their presence. And they were really unsure how to be when that child was displaying they weren't having a good time. They didn't know how to navigate that well. So the way to move that through is like so often that we do, as we spoke about in last week's podcast, is to use some sort of derogatory humor.
Yeah,
we do.
Which that's just a childlike version of a derogatory remark.
Right, exactly. And so I could see that, and what I started to realize was, oh, they really want to be in connection with my child. They just don't know how. So as soon as I could be a bridge and be like, yeah, that looks really hard for you, mate. How about we go do this and we'll do it with Nana? Or, you know, whatever, like inviting them in on that process, I think is a way of everybody feeling better loved and creates better relationship and better circumstances for your child. At the same time as recognizing if you're like me and going through phases of, you know, Joan of Arc-esque forging through triggers, might be more of your inner child than your child's experience right now.
That's a really powerful one to put the lens on, because our children will just pick up energetically what we're most stuck with. And so it'll often come up in those scenarios, right? Like when the in-laws are over, when you're in family events, you know, just because they'll sense the energy there in the space. And if we're not expressing it, someone's going to take up that space, and it will pull us forward as to, okay, well, how do you want to move with this? Are we going to shield our child? You know, make the other party wrong? Are we going to exit the space? Or can we find a way, like you're outlining there, Julie, of how to move into that desired boundary in a way that can stay in connection with these people?
Yeah, totally. Totally. Is there anything else that you'd add on to your own personal experiences of that?
I can just really feel into, you know, also what I sense was a lot of my unmet, you know, early childhood needs around feelings that certainly discouraged, not listened to, possibly punished. And so certainly with my son, with my first, I'm quite sure that like my family would struggle to see how much I would drop everything in their view to meet feelings. But I was pretty unapologetic about that being a priority for me. But I had to come to terms with it fairly quickly that wasn't, while my parents and others are very caring and very, you know, centering themselves with my children, that wasn't how they were going to likely meet feelings. And so for me, it was recognizing that my children therefore would sometimes hold themselves together, no spaces. And so they'd come home and there'd be all the feelings.
I'm so glad you said that. That's so beautiful.
And much like parents who send their children to daycare or some other kind of care, children learn where they can release their feelings and where it's going to be safer just to keep a lid on it.
Yeah.
And then there's only so much they can handle before it's all going to come out, and it likely comes out when they come home.
Oh, so much, yes.
So I would just create, and I continue to. It happened today with my 5-year-old coming back from kinder, that I just know to leave room for that.
Yeah.
And so therefore, if it's not something that therefore, because I don't resist it, it's not something that's persisting underneath, everything in our relationship. It's like, okay, well, this is here, let's just be with it.
And do you then make stories in your head or attach meaning to, well, that means they're damaged, they're not having their needs met in that care facility because they're coming home and bursting into whatever emotions are coming out?
No, I don't. Because I mean, unless I saw it as a chronic thing where it was happening again and again, and maybe they were unable to make eye contact or they were staying with feelings for a long time, then I would be looking at, okay, what's not working in this environment that my child is holding so much and is potentially going through some trauma. If I saw those kinds of things, then I would be looking at, okay, what's not working here and maybe what could be going on that's bigger. But if, like my 5-year-old, it's a couple of big outbursts and big feelings and emotional roller coaster stuff for maybe 20 minutes, and then she's back to herself on the other side of it, I know that that's just a lot that she's held in her day, and she's now safe enough to let it go, and then we can move, and then she just moves on with the rest of her evening. I wouldn't typically make it mean that it's not the right environment, because I think that as children stretch beyond us, they're going to have to navigate tricky relationships, feeling unheard, not getting what they want. And if there's not room for that to be listened to or met, then they kind of tuck it in their back pocket. But it can only stay there for so long before it weighs them down and it has to be heard. And so I see my role as, let's unpack those pockets that are weighing you down from your day and meet it and move through it. And then I think that kids can handle being in different environments. As long as they're safe and respectful environments, they're incredibly resilient.
They are incredibly resilient. And I would also say I always think what a wonderful invitation into your children working out their own relationships with other family members, as opposed to having a relationship via or through you. What is it like for them to actually establish their own untainted experience of another human, coloured through my lens? And I'm surprised, and I'm also not surprised at all, that all of my niece and nephew, each of my 4 children, I've watched them intimately in the space of other family members and caregivers. And I promise you, by the time they're 13, they know exactly who that human is. If they're allowed to, they've worked everything out about that human that they need to work out. And I think that's an enormous gift.
To be able to allow them that.
For them to truly see another human as they are, warts and all. I think that's an enormous gift. And to decide who and how they bring themselves and what level of relationship they have with that human based on what they know about them, that's an enormous gift. But that only happens when you let them.
Yeah, and it also only happens when we let ourselves be in the discomfort of maybe our family and our child struggling in relationship with each other. Like that can happen with, me watching my kids and my mum. And like my toddler today, didn't want to go to my mum at all, didn't want to engage. And that's okay. I want to make that okay for her to be authentic in relationship. My mum has learned for that to be okay. She might have a little bit of pain around that, but ultimately, if we want to have respectful relationships, we want these people that we're in relationship with to be safe, to be authentic with us. And so that can sometimes feel uncomfortable to watch people navigate that. But if we're truly going to be gifting them the skills of relating from who they are rather than constantly mitigated, you know, by us, then we need to give them that, which means we need to be willing to sit in the tension of that as we allow them to navigate that. Sometimes I'll step in if my kids need some help.
Yeah.
But with a toddler, I'm not going to ask her to do something she's clearly not in the space to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, got to have our kids' backs, but just make sure it's something that you can perceive through their body or their literal asking they need versus you reading an inner child response. Reacting from your own wounding is what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what have you got going on at the moment, Bridge?
I have got Disrupt, Revealing the Mother Wound, which is a beautiful space and container to come and unravel so much of these stories if what this podcast is bringing out resonates with you. Because until we examine the mother wound, we can stay on this kind of perpetual hamster wheel of ungrounded, I want to say almost relational pain, because we're constantly trying to avoid the thing rather than going, what's here? What are the stories that are consuming me? What have I internalized outside of me that I'm carrying? And what would it be like to decide what I really want to hold on to and what I want to leave? So that's a 5-week immersion with me, which begins on the 25th of October. So you can find out about that at bridgetwood.life. What about you, Jules? What have you got going on?
Well, I don't really have anything going on at the moment. Honey Club's always available for anyone who wants to jump into monthly or weekly feminine reminders and relationship expansion. And I'm currently in the process of building Lovers School. So in another few weeks, that will be released.
So exciting.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. So you can find out more about that at julietenner.love. You can find us at nourishingthemother.com.au, Nourishing the Mother on Facebook and Instagram. If you have 5 seconds, leave us a review. If you have 5 minutes, we would love to hear from you about what you would love to hear in your world and in the podcast. That would be delicious.
Remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
Thank you so much for listening. We literally couldn't do this without you. Please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively into your life, then head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper.
And if you feel like giving back a little to this free content, please rate us on iTunes or Facebook, all of which helps the podcast reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.